Hello and welcome to PREA training. This training is for employees and volunteers or contractors who have contact with residents. This training focuses on your role to prevent, detect, report, and respond to sexual abuse or harassment incidents in DJJ facilities and programs. All division staff and contract employees are required to receive documented PREA training during the first 3 months of employment and refresher training every 2 years thereafter. The Prison Rape Elimination Act, or PREA, is a federal law that was enacted in 2003. It establishes a zero-tolerance standard for the incidence of sexual abuse and harassment in juvenile facilities, prioritizes the prevention of sexual abuse and harassment, and increases the accountability of agencies and staff in detecting, preventing, reporting, and responding to sexual abuse incidents. In 2012, the U.S. Department of Justice released detailed standards to guide juvenile agencies and facilities in PREA compliance. These PREA standards are the basis of this training and of the Division's PREA policy. Even a single incident of sexual abuse or harassment in our facilities is too many. DJJ has a responsibility to protect the youth in our care. Some information that might be useful to you regarding sexual abuse and harassment in facilities comes from national research. We know that almost 10% of adjudicated youth report being sexually victimized by staff or other youth. Youth who identify their sexual orientation as gay, lesbian, or bisexual report a substantially higher rate of youth-on-youth victimization than heterosexual youth. And almost 4% of youth report having sex or other sexual contact with facility staff as a result of force or some other form of coercion. You have a role in complying with the requirements of PREA. Your professional conduct, preventive steps, and responses to incidents are all important in keeping youth safe. The Division's statewide PREA coordinator and each facility's compliance manager are resources for you in complying with PREA. All DJJ facilities are required to undergo independent audits for compliance with PREA every 3 years. Your knowledge of PREA is vital to the success of these audits. The first step in understanding how to keep youth safe from sexual abuse and sexual harassment is to understand these terms. The next 2 video clips are from the DJJ Resident PREA education video. The video clips define sexual abuse and sexual harassment for you.
What is sexual abuse? It is important for you to know that any kind of sexual abuse is prohibited at this facility. Sexual abuse includes a wide variety of activities, including rape, grabbing, or any touching of someone's buttocks, inner thigh, genitals, or the female breast, either over or under the clothing. Let's review the definition of sexual abuse.
Sexual abuse involves touching or trying to touch another person on certain parts of their body. Touching anyone on their breast, genitals, inner thigh, anus, or buttocks is never allowed, whether on top of or under clothing.
Hey, come on, let's get going.
No touching on the anus or buttocks.
You're so cute, I could just pinch you.
No touching the breasts.
Come on. Nobody else will see us.
No touching the inner thigh.
What is sexual harassment? Sexual harassment is repeated and unwanted comments, gestures, or jokes of a sexual or obscene nature. Let's review some examples of sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment is when a person makes repeated and unwanted sexual advances, comments, or gestures to another person.
Hey, baby. Hey, come here. You want to get some of this?
Yeah, I think she wants it.
The Division has zero tolerance for any form of sexual abuse, sexual assault, sexual harassment, or staff sexual misconduct. Zero tolerance means all allegations, regardless of seriousness, are investigated, documented, and reviewed. Anyone who condones a violation of the zero tolerance policy will be subject to disciplinary action and may be subject to criminal prosecution. Zero tolerance applies to juveniles, employees, contractors, visitors, volunteers, and any individual who has business with or uses the resources of the division. The youth in our care have the right to be free from sexual abuse and sexual harassment from other residents and from staff. They have the right to be provided with some privacy when changing clothing, showering, or using the bathroom, although sometimes self-harming behaviors may reduce this privacy. They have the right to be free from fear of punishment or retaliation for reporting sexual abuse or sexual harassment, and they have the right to be provided victim services and medical care if they are abused. There are many reasons why individuals within the facilities engage in sexual activity. These include pleasure, love, to trade or barter, expressions of self, the thrill of breaking the rules, social dominance and control, procreation, or the promise of protection. In addition, adolescents are undergoing intensive changes in their sexual and moral development, their ability to regulate their own behavior, and their sense of where and how they belong in social situations. A number of factors present among youth in custody can complicate sexual development and expression and may result in juveniles in our care being more prone to sexual offending or victimization. Some of these might include mental health issues, prior abuse and neglect, poor interpersonal skills, and other adverse childhood experiences. At DJJ, we face a delicate task in balancing the safety of youth in our custody with what might be considered age-appropriate sexual behavior. And there's no way for us to truly know if youth is being forced into a relationship through threats, intimidation, or coercion. Therefore, no sexual contact is allowed in DJJ facilities, period. Let's review what we've discussed in this section. DJJ's zero tolerance for sexual abuse and harassment applies to acts by juveniles, staff, volunteers, and contractors. Juveniles have the right to be free from sexual abuse and harassment. While in DJJ facilities, juveniles do not have the right to engage in physical relationships with each other. Mental health issues and other issues may make a juvenile more prone to victimization. Joking about people's bodies or making crude jokes may be considered sexual harassment. LGBTQI is an acronym that refers to sexual minorities, including lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning, and intersex individuals. National research and surveys show these populations are more likely to be victimized while in custody, and the PREA standards recognize the specific risks to safety and security and identify measures to help mitigate these risks. Understanding the terms is an important step toward communicating with juveniles who identify as LGBTQI in respectful ways. PREA uses terms that you may not be familiar with. If you hear a term or word that you don't understand, don't make an assumption. Instead, find out what it means, either by respectfully asking the person if appropriate, or by researching it. Here are a few examples. Intersex is a person whose sexual and reproductive anatomy or chromosomal pattern does not seem to fit typical definitions of male or female. Transgender is a person whose gender identity is different from the person's assigned sex at birth. Although the term queer historically has been used as a derogatory slang term to identify LGBTQI people, now it's a term that's been embraced and reclaimed by the community, particularly youth, as a symbol of pride, representing all individuals who fall out of the gender and sexual norms. Questioning is a term used to describe those who are in the process of discovery and exploration about their sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or a combination thereof. We all bring different experiences and values into our work in the juvenile justice system. However, our words and actions are important to create a culture of respect. An LGBTQI youth might be afraid to confide in staff about abuse or harassment for fear of mistreatment, for fear that they'll be made fun of, for fear that they'll be blamed, or for fear that they won't be believed. When defining a person's sex, gender identity, and/or expression, keep these things in mind. Gender may not be as simple as designating a person as male or female. Sometimes referred to as the invisible minority, Many LGBTQI people hide their gender and/or sexual orientation from others for a variety of reasons. Making assumptions about sexual orientation can be damaging and offensive. The best thing to do is simply call the person by their name or use a pronoun or gender with which they identify, like Miss or Mr., or call the person by the name they request. Professional communication makes our work with juveniles more effective and safer for everyone involved. First and foremost, maintain respect at all times with all people. Do not use slang or slurs to refer to anyone. Never use demeaning or offensive language to make jokes about a person's body or sexual orientation. Don't presume that others are heterosexual. Avoid language aimed at a youth's actual or perceived gender identity or sexual orientation. Remember that DJJ has zero tolerance for sexual harassment of all youth. Demeaning or insulting comments based on a person's sex or sexual orientation can be considered harassment. We've talked about the definitions of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, resident rights, LGBTQI populations, and the dynamics of sexual abuse in facilities. Next, we'll discuss your role in the prevention, detection, response, reporting of incidents between residents and the dynamics of staff sexual misconduct and harassment. It's important that you understand how to prevent sexual abuse and harassment from happening in the first place, to detect when something is not right, to report these situations and all allegations, and to respond swiftly and appropriately. DJJ has already taken a number of steps to prevent sexual abuse and sexual harassment. For example, we provide staffing levels, procedures, and supervision that help prevent compromising situations for residents and employees. We use video monitoring systems to observe and record activities on our facility. We educate juveniles about their rights to be free from abuse and how to report suspected abuse. Most of all, we seek to foster an atmosphere of professionalism and respect. In addition to abuse occurring between juvenile residents, you also have a responsibility to prevent sexual abuse between staff and residents. Alaska's sexual assault laws prohibit juvenile probation or facility staff from sexual contact with a person under the custody or supervision of the department. The abuse of inherent authority is at the core of staff sexual misconduct. The difference in power between staff and juveniles makes a consensual relationship impossible and illegal. It's essential that you always maintain personal, physical, and emotional boundaries with juveniles. You should avoid situations in which you're alone with a resident in such a way that could lead to indefensible charges of sexual abuse, harassment, or physical abuse. Be mindful of your conversations. Sexual innuendos, crude jokes, references to sexual orientation, body parts, or teasing are inappropriate. Only place your hands on juveniles when necessary to maintain safety. Misconduct between staff and juveniles is more likely to occur in circumstances in which an individual's ability to make sound choices is weakened. Some of these circumstances might include when there's a personal relationship difficulty, the death of a loved one, some emotional or physical fatigue, substance abuse, or coworker conflict. A few behaviors that might indicate coworkers may be at greater risk of committing sexual misconduct include over-identification or concern with a single juvenile as my kid, horseplay, favoritism, or spending unexplainable amounts of time with a single juvenile, staff spending unexplainable time in the facility during off hours, or a juvenile knowing personal information about a staff member. Let's review what we've talked about in this section. Sexual contact between staff and a juvenile under the division's supervision is against Alaska law. That's true even if the resident is over 18 years old. It's best practice to avoid telling crude jokes while working or volunteering, as that can be considered sexual harassment. And you must report signs that a staff or volunteer might be in danger of an inappropriate relationship with the juvenile for their safety and for everyone's protection. In order to effectively prevent sexual abuse within a facility, it's important to know what to look for. We're now going to be exploring the characteristics of potential victims and perpetrators. We'll also examine how abuse plays out differently between male and female residents. Sexual abuse can happen to anyone. However, national research shows individuals with some characteristics are at higher risk for sexual abuse. Having it be the first time a youth is in the facility, someone with small stature, self-identification as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning, speech or visual impairment, intellectual developmental disabilities, prior victimization, effeminate characteristics for boys, or limited English proficiency all increase the risk for sexual victimization. Anyone can be a perpetrator of sexual abuse as well. Generally, juveniles who perpetrate have some of the following traits. They've been arrested on violent crimes and/or sexual crimes. They're repeat or long-term offenders who are familiar with the facility culture. Or they're larger, older, and act more confident than other residents. As required by the PREA standards, DJJ has developed the PREA risk screening to help identify potential victims and perpetrators. The screening is administered to every juvenile within 72 hours of admission, and the results are used to help guide housing, program, and supervision decisions to prevent abuse from occurring in our facilities. National research shows that boys and girls tend to have different dynamics as sexual abusers and as victims in juvenile facilities. Abuse between girls tends to be less violent than boys and often appears as if it's an ongoing relationship. In contrast to girls, sexual abuse by boys is more likely to involve violence and physical control. Older, larger, more experienced, or mentally ill boys tend to use intimidation or surprise to engage in sexual abuse. DJJ facilities house both boys and girls. This proximity may provide more potential for inappropriate sexual contact, sexual abuse, or harassment. Co-ed units and facilities need to be especially diligent in efforts to educate youth about appropriate behavior and maintaining boundaries. Sexual abuse or sexual harassment can occur in virtually any area in a facility at any time. Best practices to prevent and detect sexual abuse and harassment include keeping open lines of communication with youth, conducting frequent random area checks, and providing direct supervision to juveniles. In order to recognize abuse, it's important that you are alert for changes that might indicate abuse. Sudden changes in behavior, appearance, or attitude, self-harming behavior or suicide attempts, inadequate personal hygiene, or unexplained depression or anxiety can all be signs of victimization. Be aware that male victims tend to be more guarded and reluctant to ask for help than female victims. In this section, we've discussed the idea that a juvenile with developmental or intellectual disabilities may be more likely to be a victim of sexual abuse in a facility. Sexual abuse between girls and boys often looks different, and sexual abuse between girls is less likely to be violent than abuse between boys. All sexual behavior between juveniles is prohibited strictly in our facilities. And changes in physical appearance or personal hygiene may be an indication of potential sexual abuse. PREA standards require employees, teachers, volunteers, contractors, and visitors to report knowledge, suspicion, or information they receive regarding an incident of sexual abuse or sexual harassment. You're also required to notify your supervisor regarding any retaliation against residents or staff members who report an incident, staff neglect, or violations of responsibilities that may have contributed to an incident or retaliation. And whether we learn about sexual abuse or harassment incidents through direct observation or through verbal allegations or written allegations or anonymously or from third parties such as parents, no matter how we learn of an incident, a prompt and professional response is necessary. Juveniles in a facility or on probation supervision are also expected to report any incidents of sexual abuse or harassment. The next video you'll see is part of the training designed for DJJ-involved youth to encourage them to understand their rights about how to report an incident.
You should immediately report abuse or suspected abuse happening to you or someone else. The sooner you report abusive behavior, the sooner DJJ staff can stop it. There are 4 ways to report abuse or suspected abuse. 1. Tell a trusted teacher, staff member, JJO, mental health clinician, probation officer, nurse, or your parent. 2. Make a written report. Your written report may be dropped in the grievance drop box without leaving your name. Grievance forms are available in all facilities and through your counselor or probation officer. Completed forms should be placed in the locked grievance box on the unit, given to your counselor or to a staff member. Access to information will be limited to those who need to know. If you leave your name, you will receive a copy of the response to your grievance. 3. You can mail your written report to a non-DJJ victim agency. You do not have to leave your name. Ask a facility staff member for a PREA envelope. And 4. Ask to be connected to the PREA hotline. The hotline is available 24 hours a day. You can use the hotline without leaving your name. The people on the hotline will contact the professionals who will investigate what is going on at the facility. Let's review the many ways to report sexual abuse or suspected sexual abuse. Remember, the sooner you report abusive behavior, the sooner the DJJ staff can make it stop.
Report to a teacher.
Hi. Do you have a minute? I need to tell you about something that happened.
Sure. Have a seat and let's talk about it.
Report to a staff member you trust.
Can you help me report a problem? Someone touched me.
Yes, absolutely. I'm here to help. Are you okay?
Report to a clinician.
He didn't touch me, but the way he talked to me really bothered me.
It's good that you're reporting it. Tell me what happened.
Tell your probation officer.
Okay, I'll help you file a report. Can you tell me when this occurred?
Yeah. It happened this morning in class.
Tell your parent or guardian.
Mom, I don't know what to do. It made me feel so uncomfortable.
I know what to do. We need to report this. I'll help you.
File a written grievance. Call the external reporting agency's phone number that is listed at your facility.
Hello. May I take your report?
Yes, I need to report a case of sexual abuse.
As you saw in that video, there are 4 ways youth can report. They know that they can tell someone, whether that's a staff, parent, mental health clinician, probation officer, or the PREA coordinator. They know that they can use the PREA drop box to make a written report confidentially. They know that they can call the PREA hotline and make a report over the phone, or they can send a report to an outside reporting agency by requesting an envelope from any staff. When an incident is reported, everyone should be free from retaliation. The division has established procedures to report abuse privately to protect you and the victim from retaliation. For example, incident reports of staff misconduct are confidential to protect the identity of both the person making the report and the subject of the incident. Each facility's PREA compliance manager is responsible for checking in with those who make reports to ensure they are free from retaliation. It's important you understand your responsibility to respond immediately. Take every allegation of sexual abuse or harassment seriously, whether you see it yourself or receive it verbally, in writing, or from a third party. A first responder to an allegation of sexual abuse must ensure the safety and welfare of the juveniles and the staff. They must secure the scene and separate victims, perpetrators, and witnesses. They must ask the juvenile or staff if they need medical attention, and notify their supervisors and follow the facility's established protocols. We encourage you to notify your supervisor, the principal, or a DJJ section supervisor. How should you respond as an initial responder? You should first gather information. During the initial response, however, staff must take care not to exceed their investigatory responsibilities. Limit any questions to those involved to information about what happened, who was involved, where the incident took place, and at what time the incident occurred. Then determine if it's criminal. If staff find information that indicates the incident appears to be criminal, sexual assault, sexual abuse of a minor, indecent exposure, for example, then, after the first responder's duties have been performed, the shift supervisor or designee will implement the PREA incident checklist to ensure all critical tasks are completed. Criminal investigations will occur if determined to be a criminal incident. While awaiting law enforcement, you should reassure and calm the victims, advise them that they'll be kept safe, and avoid inappropriate emotional involvement or additional questioning. Make sure you follow the policies. For non-criminal allegations, or after consultation with law enforcement, the division will follow its policies and procedures for incident notification and reporting, administrative investigations of staff, and investigations and disciplinary actions of juveniles. Incident reporting is crucial. Every allegation of sexual abuse or sexual harassment, regardless of source or the outcome of the investigation, requires an incident report. These reports assist our efforts to prevent, detect, and respond to sexual abuse incidents. A summary of all PREA incidents is reported annually to the federal government and made available to the public. So in review, you are required to notify your supervisor about all allegations of abuse regardless of the source. All reports of abuse, including those made anonymously, will be administratively reviewed or investigated. And as a first responder to a sexual abuse incident, your first action is to ensure the safety of the juveniles and the staff involved. Congratulations, you've successfully completed PREA training. Today you've learned about our zero tolerance policy for abuse and harassment, communicating effectively with LGBTQI youth, your role in preventing, detecting, reporting, and responding to abuse, the dynamics of sexual abuse, and signs a juvenile might be the victim of abuse, and how to prevent sexual abuse between juveniles and between juveniles and staff. Here you'll find contact information for our statewide PREA coordinator, as well as a list of facility PREA compliance managers. Please review this list and make sure you know who the compliance manager is for the facility that you're working at. In order for you to get credit for completing this training, you still need to complete the provided acknowledgement form. This will give you and the division a record of your completion of this training on this date. Finally, we'd like to say thank you for your time and attention to this training and for the work that you do to help us serve juveniles and keep them safe.